No woman had ever survived Dominic Kane's heart. Some got lost in the luxury, others ran from his intensity, but all ended up broken. Until Vivian Cole appeared, the only one bold enough to challenge him in public, refusing the invitation every other woman would have accepted. From a cruel game was born a battle of power and desire. And when New York's most feared millionaire finally lowered his guard, he discovered that love could be his greatest defeat or the only victory that truly mattered. The silence of the private bar was broken by the sharp echo of footsteps on the marble floor. Dominic Kane crossed the room as if the entire space belonged to him. His black suit, cut with surgical precision, caught the soft glow of the golden chandeliers. Broad shoulders, perfect posture that never wavered. Every detail announced power, but it was the atmosphere around him that carried the weight, as if the very air grew heavier in his presence. Conversations faded, glasses were left half full. Even the background music seemed to retreat. Some men adjusted their jackets, disguising their unease as if they needed to reassert themselves. The women reacted in opposite ways. Some stared boldly, others looked away quickly, as though afraid of being caught. Dominic didn't need to speak to be noticed. His presence spoke for him. There was a contradiction in him, a magnet of fascination and danger, like a storm waiting to break. He had been with too many women, yet none had stayed. None had endured the fire that burned behind his gaze. The whisper of an old lover still haunted him. "You feel too much, Dominic. You love as if it's a war." The words lingered like a weight, a scar no one could see, but that he carried everywhere. He walked to the bar, ordering a whiskey without even glancing at the bartender. The city lights glittered outside the tall glass windows, but Dominic seemed detached from it all. His face carried the expression of a man daring the world to challenge him. No distraction could silence the heaviness of his own thoughts. His power came not only from his wealth, but from the emptiness he refused to show. And in that room filled with curious glances and silent judgments, one question hovered unspoken: how far would a man go when he turned love into war? And what would happen when someone finally dared to stand against the full force of Dominic Kane? He hadn't come to be admired. His goal was simple: meet an investor, close a multi-million-dollar deal, and leave before the night dragged on. In less than 10 minutes, the contract was signed. Business had always been predictable: numbers, percentages, promises of profit. Nothing surprised him. Nothing required more than his usual cold precision, until a firm voice, laced with irony, cut through the air behind him. He turned slowly, curious. A woman sat at the bar, her emerald dress highlighting every detail of her confident posture. It wasn't just her beauty that drew attention, but the way she held his gaze. There was no fear, only firmness. The contrast was so unexpected that, for a moment, Dominic almost forgot the automatic response he used with strangers. Vivian Cole, that's how she introduced herself, with a smile that felt more like a challenge than a greeting. While others looked away to avoid Dominic's intensity, she met his eyes head-on, as if testing his patience. Her voice carried a rhythm of its own, measured, almost provocative, the kind of presence that refused to bow to anyone. The silence around them turned into magnetic tension. There was something in her that didn't fit the logic of power Dominic knew. It wasn't submission. It wasn't flattery, it was equality. Vivian looked at him as if he were just a man, not the millionaire who made others lower their heads. That unexpected boldness held him more than any fleeting conquest ever had. And in that brief moment between the glass, she slowly turned in her hand, and the gaze that refused to shift, an invisible spark, was born. The kind of spark that could ignite much more than a single night in a bar. Vivian didn't step back. On the contrary, she leaned forward slightly, as if about to deliver a calculated provocation. Her tone was light, almost playful, yet carried a firmness impossible to ignore. You walk into places like you own them, but have you ever thought that maybe it's the place that owns you? The words landed like an unexpected blow. Dominic raised an eyebrow, intrigued. The millionaire, so used to controlling conversations, felt the balance shift. Vivian wasn't just speaking to him, she was challenging him. The bar seemed to fall into silence out of respect for their exchange. A few people watched discreetly, curious, while Dominic stood still, studying every detail of the woman who dared confront him. It was as if he were staring into a mirror that revealed a reflection he didn't want to face. Vivian lifted her glass, letting the crystal catch the soft glow of the room. "You think you need to conquer? I think you already have. Just by being here." The words, spoken almost casually, hit him with the weight of revelation. Dominic felt the rigid line of his shoulders loosen, even if only for a few seconds. For the first time in a long while, he didn't have a ready reply. The game was turning dangerous. Dominic was used to women who swooned, who followed without question. But with Vivian, there was no pedestal, no submission, only a silent dance of power and vulnerability. He realized he didn't want to leave. The night, which was supposed to end after the contract was signed, had just found a new purpose. And as she smiled enigmatically, leaving more questions than answers hanging in the air, Dominic knew something had changed. This was no longer a casual encounter. It was the beginning of a game that could rewrite his own rules, and he had no idea where it would lead him. Days later, Dominic received the guest list for an exclusive auction in Manhattan. Among collectors, businessmen, and politicians, one name caught his eye and stole his breath for a moment: Vivian Cole. He didn't think twice. He rearranged commitments, canceled meetings, and cleared his entire schedule. For the first time in years, it wasn't business driving his steps, it was a woman. The auction hall glowed with golden lights, reflecting off works of art. Men in tailored suits and women in elegant gowns mingled to the discreet sound of violins. Dominic entered with his usual confidence, but his eyes searched for only one thing. And when he finally found her, the world seemed to slow. Vivian stood radiant in a black dress, elegant, understated, as though she had been made for that very moment. She noticed him immediately. Surprise flickered across her face, but there was no retreat in her posture. Dominic moved toward her slowly, like a hunter who knows exactly where to aim. The surrounding conversations became little more than background noise. Leaning closer, his voice was low, filled with intent. "I didn't expect to see you here, but I couldn't miss the chance." Her enigmatic smile was all the answer he needed. Amid the elegant crowd, he took the risk of a direct invitation. Dinner, just the two of them, without an audience. Vivian tilted her head, studying him with calm, like someone weighing a dangerous proposal. Then, instead of refusing or accepting, she set a condition. Then when, it wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was a challenge, sharp as their first encounter. Dominic felt the adrenaline surge. This wasn't going to be easy, and that made it even more intoxicating. The promise of that single word win hung in the air, like an invisible thread pulling them closer. The game had begun again, and this time, no audience could distract from what was about to unfold. The next morning, Dominic sent flowers. Not ordinary flowers, but rare ones flown in from Holland, chosen with precision. Nestled within the arrangement was an elegant card: dinner at 8, in the most exclusive restaurant in the city. But Vivian never came. The card sat untouched on the table, a silent refusal. The man who never heard no felt, for the first time, the sting of rejection. The following day, Dominic didn't leave the task to assistants or messages. He went himself. He was standing before her even before the day was done. Vivian greeted him calmly, but without softness. "You think you can solve everything with grand gestures," she said firmly. "I don't say yes just because people expect me to." It was a direct strike at the pride that had always defined him. He drew in a breath, and for the first time, he didn't respond with arrogance. He simply listened. The heavy silence between them was something new. Dominic was used to bending wills, winning through persistence or power. But Vivian did not bend. She didn't back down, and she wasn't impressed. Her gaze demanded something money couldn't buy: truth. And there, in front of the one barrier he couldn't break, Dominic realized he was willing to try for real, not as the millionaire accustomed to winning, but as a man who wanted to be seen beyond the power he carried. His persistence would not come in the form of luxury, but of presence. And that changed everything. Vivian, in turn, let slip a nearly imperceptible smile, like someone recognizing an effort still fragile, but sincere. Dominic left knowing the challenge had only just begun, and that, for the first time, it was worth losing control to gain something greater. Dinner took place in a discreet restaurant, far from cameras and society columns. The lighting was low and warm, with candles flickering against the wine glasses. There was no audience, only the two of them seated at a simple table, heavy with unspoken tension. Dominic, so used to leading the pace of every encounter, felt out of place in his own skin. For the first time, he didn't want to impress, he wanted to be heard. The conversation began light. Favorite books, songs tied to memories, small stories that revealed more than they seemed. Vivian spoke with clarity, without masks, and Dominic found himself answering with the same intensity. Every shared laugh stripped away a layer of the armor he had carried for years. This was unlike anything he had ever known. Between one glass and the next, Dominic let slip something he rarely touched. His childhood, parents who despised each other, a home filled with shouting, nights when he swore he would never depend on anyone. The words came out sharp, but his eyes betrayed the pain behind them. Vivian didn't try to soften it, didn't offer empty comfort. She simply looked at him with empathy, the kind that needs no words to be understood. "I'm not her," she said after a silence heavy with meaning. There was no need to explain who she was. Dominic understood. It wasn't about the past, it was about the present. Vivian hadn't come to repeat patterns, but to break them. The words lingered in the air, light yet powerful, leaving Dominic without a reply. The night went on, but it never felt like enough. Something kept them there, bound by a connection that defied logic. Dominic left that dinner changed. He didn't yet know how to handle it, but he knew that, for the first time, someone had crossed the fortress he himself had built. The night didn't end at the restaurant. The silence in the car was thick with tension, each glance more intense than any word. When they reached Dominic's penthouse, the city glittered below them, but nothing compared to the energy between the two. It was as if time had stopped the moment she stepped into the space that, until then, no woman had ever touched. Inside, no luxury could distract from what truly mattered. Dominic, the man of masks, stood stripped of them all. There was no stance of the millionaire, only a man before a woman who dared to see him completely. Their gestures were slow, almost uncertain, as if both knew they were crossing a line from which there was no return. When their bodies finally came together, it wasn't just desire, it was surrender. Dominic revealed himself raw, stripped of control, and Vivian met him with both tenderness and strength. There was something sacred in that vulnerability. His breath came heavy not from pleasure, but from the fear of losing himself in her. It was a risk he had never taken. In the midst of the intensity, a rough whisper escaped him, "You scare me." The confession lingered in the air, so honest it could have shattered the moment. But Vivian didn't flinch. She simply replied, steady and gentle, "Good. That means you're really here." The words struck him with an undeniable truth. And in that moment, Dominic understood it was no longer about power or conquest. It was about being present, whole, and undefended. Dawn would arrive in a few hours, bringing with it doubts and fears. But until then, the millionaire finally tasted what it meant to be simply human. The morning light poured through the glass windows of the penthouse, illuminating the tangled sheets. Dominic rose before her, already dressed, already back in the mode he knew best. Business, deadlines, control. The night before seemed locked away in a drawer he refused to open. Vivian watched in silence, noticing how the coldness returned to his face like a carefully placed mask. She rose slowly, her bare feet brushing against the cold marble. "Don't you see?" she said firmly, breaking the silence. "You think letting someone in is about control. I think it's about trust." Dominic remained quiet, adjusting his tie in front of the mirror. The reflection showed a man flawless on the outside, but distant within. Vivian stepped closer, her gaze burning with frustration. "You showed me who you really are, and now you act as if it was just another night." The pain in her words cut through the heavy air of the penthouse. Dominic wanted to reply, but his lips closed before he could. His silence spoke louder than any excuse. She picked up her bag, unhurried but resolute. The sound of her heels echoed like a farewell against the marble floor. Each step was a reminder that not all power is enough to hold someone who asks only for truth. Dominic watched her, but didn't move a muscle to stop her. He was trapped between the fear of losing control and the greater fear of losing her. When the door shut behind her, the silence was deafening. Dominic stood alone, surrounded by luxury that no longer filled the emptiness. For the first time in years, he didn't know if he was still running the game or if he had just lost it completely. Hours turned into days, and days into weeks. The once vibrant penthouse felt hollow. The silence that filled the rooms was different now. It was no longer the silence of power, but of emptiness. Dominic began to realize that the control he had chased all his life was nothing more than a prison disguised as strength. And in that prison, he was utterly alone. It was on a sleepless night that he finally picked up the phone and, after years of distance, called his father. The words were brief, heavy with bitterness, but necessary. Old wounds resurfaced: the abandonment, the shouting, the broken home. Dominic realized he had spent his life running from those scars, trying to bury them beneath business, women, and luxury. But running had never been healing. In the days that followed, he began to change. He canceled unnecessary meetings, delegated tasks, and made room for what he had always avoided: feeling. He faced his own ghosts with the same courage he once used to close million-dollar deals. But this time, there was no profit at the end, only the possibility of starting over. Vivian was still present in every memory. The steady smile, the gaze that never backed down, the words that exposed his deepest weakness. Dominic realized he didn't just want her back. He wanted to deserve her, and that required more than power. It required surrender. For the first time, he wasn't planning a conquest, but a transformation. The decision was made. He wouldn't seek her as before, with arrogance or shallow persistence. He would go to her with truth, offering what he had never given anyone: everything. Dominic was ready to lose control if that meant finally gaining what had always slipped through his hands. He found her on a rainy afternoon. No bodyguards, no expensive flowers, no extravagant invitations. Just him, in a silk suit, standing at Vivian's door. When she opened it, surprised but cautious, she found a different man. His eyes carried no arrogance anymore, only vulnerability. The silence between them was heavy, yet filled with unspoken promises. "I don't want halfway," he said, his voice low, almost breaking. "If you let me in, I'll give you everything. Not halves, not fragments. Everything." From the folder in his hand, he pulled out a small key. It wasn't to a luxury car or a bank account. It was to his own penthouse, the place no one had ever touched. He held it out with trembling hands. Vivian drew a deep breath, studying every detail. The gesture wasn't about possession, but surrender. For the first time, Dominic wasn't offering power, but vulnerability. The silence between them broke with the soft sound of the key being accepted. She didn't say a word, she simply stepped closer, and in the kiss they shared, there was no more game, only surrender. 6 months later, at another gala, Dominic was no longer alone. By his side, Vivian shone not as a conquest, but as a partner. The curious looks of society didn't matter. The man everyone once called too intense now carried a smile only she understood. The world could judge, but nothing could undo what had been built in silence. When someone muttered with scorn that Dominic felt too much, Vivian only smiled and replied, "Not for me." And in that moment, it became clear. The millionaire who once loved like war had finally found peace in the arms of the only woman bold enough to face him. And you? How many times have you let pride speak louder than love? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep following stories as moving as this one.